Hello, and welcome to Pizza Steve TV. In this episode, we're going to be interviewing the people. In this show, The People, I'm going to be interviewing interesting and unique people that I've met and people who have unique and interesting stories to tell. I interviewed Joe Harris, an 88-year-old retired philosophy teacher who has tons of great stories. This episode will be a two-parter because Joe Harris has lots of stories to tell. I hope you get to know him because he is an amazing person. We'll see you there.
Meet Joe Harris. He's the hardest working 88-year-old I know. After retiring as a philosophy professor, he went on to work for the post office for 10 years in his 60s.
I had a student at Wofford College, and he and I shared a lot in common. In fact, he went with me to Illinois one time. He was very much an outdoorsman. We'd canoe together. Well, while he was a student, he used to counsel troubled youth. He takes them to the library and all like this. Well, years later, after he graduated, he went to seminary and became an Episcopal priest over at Shelby. Well, I had my teenage son with me one time, and I called him from across town from the car, and he didn't recognize my voice, and he asked who I was. And I said, well, when I knew you, I was a troubled youth, and my son was over there in stitches. He said, well, how are you doing now? I said, well, I have my ups and downs, but I'm making progress. And my son could hardly contain himself. Well, anyway, we went to the guy's office. He came out and he said, I thought you were one of my boys, and here's my crazy philosophy professor.
Oh. Could you tell us the story of how your parents met?
Yes. My father grew up in Ohio, and my mother grew up in Virginia. My father's father grew up on a farm in Ohio and spent a couple years in Texas teaching school and working in the ministry. But later he started a new church work in West Virginia. Well, at one time he was in Virginia and set up his tent on the 5-acre farm where my mother grew up, over in Virginia. My mother was only 5 years old, my father was 12, and her first memory of him was he was pushing her in the swing and counting in Latin. They used to think that was the way to be scholarly, was to know Latin. And his father was old-fashioned, but very much a scholar, Well, anyway, later the Virginia family moved to West Virginia to join the new church work that my grandfather started there. My mother's father had a third-grade education. He was very artistic, very mild-mannered, and very devout. And my grandfather Harris was much more self-assured. Well, in West Virginia, my mother's father would go to the other grandfather for spiritual advice, personal advice, and he'd always say if he went wrong then to Judgment Day, the burden would be on the other man, which my grandfather Harris was quite willing to assume. My mother was very artistic, like her father, and my father was very mathematically inclined, very systematic. My father trained in ministry under his father, and eventually, as my father started his livelihood, he carried mail in town, and my mother had such a crush on him, she'd cross the street so she wouldn't have to speak to him and maybe betray her feeling for him. The time came one time she was practicing organ at church, and he called, told her to put her coat on, come outside, he wanted to talk to her. He told her how much personally he admired her and respected her gifts and wanted to see her make the most of her life. She did not sleep a wink that night. The two started talking seriously, and at first my father's father thought it was rather cute, but then my father's mother realized his substitute father in the family might be subject to undergoing a change. So pretty soon the sermon started reflecting this concern that if such and such friendship results in marriage, God will visit his wrath and judgment on the home. Some of my students thought that came true. They thought it was God's will. And so they secretly, he had her walk all the way across town, all the way across this long bridge, and then drove to Bluefield to talk to a minister friend of the family about marriage. Then my grandfather Harris got jealous, and he said to my father, if you're going to get married, you might as well have someone in the family do this. They changed plans. Here they are gathered at this small country church, which we'll visit, and my grandfather Harris is having the wedding sermon. And it starts out, this being of God's will. My mother's father leaned over to his wife and said, I wonder when God changed his mind. John Dewey was an American philosopher, and he said all thinking begins with a problem. I think I had enough problems growing up that's why I ended up in philosophy. And eventually he started holding meetings in southern West Virginia in coal mining areas and so forth. Land was donated, and that's where he built this camp area. And I believe the first camp meeting was 1915. This is 107th camp meeting this year. This is a flower. He started out with just tents there. There's one building which is called the parsonage or the cottage. In his book, we have a picture of that with his 37 Studebaker parked in front of it. And those are the memories I have. It was the first building, and then the second building was the church. And at that time, there was no church on this whole section of road. There was one man who was a member of the church. He had new lumber sawed for a new house. He lived way up on the mountain. But he donated all that lumber to build the church. For the rest of his life, lived in the old house. In 1960, when I came back from Germany, we had a very heavy snowfall, and that man did not get to church for 30 days. Over the bank, I think the snow was drifted 20 feet deep, and he walked 3 miles to church each way, and rarely he would ride his horse at night. But he lived on top of the mountain, had an apple orchard there. He was the Sunday school superintendent for all those years. Little by little, they built other buildings. Unfortunately, in my grandfather's book, he says the least about building this large tabernacle, which is the assembly that's been there since, I believe, 1928, and it has chestnut pillars 14 feet long.
Oh.
You know, the chestnut is a very special.
American chestnut?
Right. That was cut in the area. And I asked my uncle, who worked for MIT for years, he was 8 years old when they built that. And my grandfather built it as a timber frame on the ground, and I asked my uncle, how did he erect it? He said, with a gin pole. That's a long lever that you pry up and erect the thing. So, I mean, there was pretty sophisticated engineering went into the design and erection of that thing. At one point, I think my grandfather was up there and started to fall, and I had an uncle who was handicapped, we call it autistic now, and he rescued him. But anyway, when my grandfather was 12 years old, he and his brother were playing Indians, and his brother shot a weed at him and hit his eye, and for the rest of his life he was blind in that eye. You couldn't tell by looking at him, but he got his driver's license when he was about 40 years old, and for the rest of his life drove that 37 Studebaker. The history of the camp has gone on. During World War I, they had, of course, the Spanish flu. You know, there were many, many deaths from that. And World War I, a lot of people were away. They had camp meeting every year until a year before last, when the COVID thing, and it was real hard for my brother to come to a decision not to have camp, because it was the first time there had never been a camp. As he put it, he said they rescheduled the camp for the following year. There are 3 rivers that come together at my hometown. One of them is the Bluestone River, and you cross that on a big high bridge, and there's a story behind that. And one time I had a date with a girl from college, and I rented a boat, and I swam all the way across this river here, maybe a quarter mile or less. In North Carolina, you'll pass the headwaters of New River, and that goes all the way through here, and then it comes out at that dam in my hometown. Below my hometown is the newest national park called the New River Gorge Park. And that's a waterway where they take rafting trips. That is the most hopeful thing, that where they're bringing the deserts back in China and other Africa. And they're even talking about parts of the Sahara. They say one time the Sahara was just lush with a lot of water. And even now they say there's a huge water table under the desert. But, you know, things change on the earth. I keep thinking about the farmer that was showing his farm to the preacher, and the preacher said, "It sure is a nice job you and the Lord are doing here. The farmer said, "You should have seen it when he was doing it by himself." Well, the sequel to that is, let's try the farmer doing it by himself. No sunshine, no rain, no soil. Where is he going to go? They were talking about having extension courses for farmers. One farmer said, "They can't teach me nothing. I've done wore out 2 farms." As far as the environment goes, that's where a lot of people are right now. I've done worn out 2 farms. So most farmers are more aware than that now, and I hope the time will come when the average person is more acutely aware of the environment. This is a elderberry, which up in West Virginia we considered just a junk thing, but now they're finding it's extremely nutritious. There's a joke, they say the English eat to live, the French live to eat, the Germans live to be able to work. Of course, it sounds funnier in German.
Joe now takes me on a tour in the back part of his yard, which has been invaded by bamboo. It is everywhere. He is walking me through this jungle where it feels like we're in a different part of the world, but we're right there in South Carolina, Chesney area, and we're about to stumble upon a trailer which he says he used to take naps in all the time by the creek, and it has been dilapidated. Oh wow.
There's a lot of books and stuff. I need to try to go in there and try to retrieve some of it. Prettiest part of the creek right here. And during the spring, this hillside is covered with white azaleas and mountain laurel that blooms in May. But this was a nice place just to have a picnic area. We'd bring a watermelon, drop it in the creek, and this was about waist deep, and we'd get cooled off here. Where the water is running, they're much less of a problem. I used to have almost no problem with mosquitoes in that trailer. This is a 2020 Chevy BOLT, not VOLT, but B as in Baker. It's all electric. I had a Nissan Leaf before that, which I would have been happy to keep indefinitely, but this had so much better range than the Leaf, and there was a wonderful price on this. I traded the Leaf in. They allowed me $3,000 on it with all the dealer fees and everything delivered up here free of charge. Total, I think I had about $21,500 in it, which is a fantastic price. Actually, General Motors had $11,000 rebate, but the unfortunate thing, General Motors is saying they're not going to make any more after 2023, which to me is a huge mistake because it's a great answer. As often as I put gas in it.
Never. So it's fully electric.
All electric.
How do you charge it up?
Here's a charger on the wall, which gives 240 volts and double the amperage. And so this is a lot faster way to charge than just on household electricity of 120 volt. The 120 volt is called level 1, and you can do that anywhere along the road, but this is called a level 2 charger. And then there's a level 3 charger, which is called a DC fast charge. In 50 minutes, you can be up to an 80% charge wherever you are. On this one, depends on where you are. On the level 1 charge, you only get 5-mile range every hour. On this, you get 27, so it's more than 4 times as fast. On the DC fast charge, wherever you are, in 50 minutes, you're up to an 80% charge. When I go to West Virginia, I can stop in Hickory, North Carolina, either at the Chevy dealer or to Nissan dealer. 24 hours a day, I can charge DC fast charge, free of charge. This is the level 2 charger here. Now this would fold down if you have a DC fast charge, but on this you just use it right there. See, it's charging it's blinking 3 times. When you're down low, it'll blink 1 time. There's 4 banks. Then you get up to another level, it blinks twice. Then it blinks 3 times. When you get up toward the top, it blinks 4 times, and finally it stays solid, and then it's fully charged. When it's fully charged, it'll show over 300 miles, maybe 320 miles. And realistically, you might go 280 on that. On country roads, you might do a little more than that. That's just an estimate. Don't ask Joe Harris what his power bill is. Well, they told about the time that I was teaching up at Polk Central, and one of the teachers said, this was 30 years ago said his bill was $150 a month, and another teacher said his was $175. I said, well, my bill went up 25% last month. It went from $16 to $20. One of them said, who wants to hit him first? In the trailer we lived in, we had an electric water heater. And when the water was frozen, I was afraid it might overheat, so I unplugged it. And immediately I saw my power bill was dropping from $28 a month to $8 a month. So I never did turn it back on. Back then, of course, we just started heating water on the wood stove or one thing or another, you know, but I'm big on economy. This is only 3.5 minutes long. There's a picture. The saxophone. Trombone. Two comments on that piece. Someone said, only the Russians could write something so sad and so joyful at the same time. Someone else said, there are two kinds of people in the world, those who think this is a great composition and those who are wrong.
Thank you guys very much. I'm Pizza Steve. Always eat your crust. Good night.